Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good night, wherever you are in the world. Today is the 2nd of November 2023. Eastern time is about 8:02 p.m. And welcome to Filecoin Core Devs call number 63. Today we have a number of things to discuss. Pledge baseline error and mitigations by Alex North. We have, some last call reminders on FIP 74 and 76. Caitlin will be taking us through FIP 1v2 initiative updates and everything related to that we need to know. And then just a short reminder, or rather updates in terms of NV21 Watermelon upgrade updates and what's going on over there. Without further ado, I'll pass this on now to Alex. Over to you.
Thank you. You can move. Yeah, great. Okay, first up. You should, members of Core Dev should have seen a discussion in our channel, and there were discussions at both of the Phil Dev summits about this issue, which is open in discussion 847 about an error in the design of the initial consensus pledge function. Both the both of all of the in-person chats that we had at the summits, none of them included everyone in Core Devs, and so most of the discussion has been in Slack or in this public GitHub discussion. But as a result of that, we identified this issue, this design error, and decided that the appropriate response is to discuss it in public and build a FIP, build a proposal to mitigate it. And so this discussion has been open for 3 weeks. I'm not going to recap too much of it here, but there's a very brief recap, I guess, because we haven't had a discussion of it in this call before. The baseline function is an exponential. It doubles every year, and it's present in the initial consensus pledge calculation in the denominator, so underneath the division. This means that because it's an exponential, it grows faster than anything else. And so unless the numerator of that division also follows a similar exponential, the result...
Okay, Joseph, is it?
Are you sure? Not on mute.
Sorry.
The result is that the output tends towards zero. The exponential grows faster than anything else. And so eventually the output of the initial consensus pledge calculation goes to zero. This in turn drives the consensus pledge requirement to zero, drives the total locked collateral towards zero, not quite to zero because there's the storage pledge, which is a fraction of that value, which is independent of the baseline. But trending the total network pledge towards zero is clearly not what was intended by the specification. It would severely undermine consensus security, which at today's scale, I guess storage pledge does tend towards zero as well, a bit more slowly because the block reward is decaying on a slower exponential, but it also goes to zero. Trending network pledge to zero would significantly undermine consensus security, which at today's scales, consensus security is largely leans on the pledge collateral. At a much greater scale, that the hardware would also contribute meaningful security, but today stake is the bigger part. It would also, the process of going from 30% of the supply being locked towards 0% of the supply being locked would be massive inflation, which would presumably impact the exchange rate and impact any fiat denominated returns that SPs are facing. So it would undermine all of their profits. Next slide, please. Great. Okay, so the outline of the proposal is that we do the same thing to the baseline function. Another place where the baseline function is used is in the minting model. And so the proposal here is to have the consensus pledge calculation follow the same structure as the minting rate calculation, and split it into a small part which doesn't have the baseline in the denominator and a larger part which does. And so that would mean, in the same way that block rewards are currently decaying towards they're not down there yet, but they're going down from sort of the full amount down towards a sort of this floor rate of 30% of the maximum amount. The initial consensus pledge would also trend down exponentially, but not towards zero, down towards this 30% floor value. And that maintains enough network-wide pledge to give some meaningful security, and prevents it going to zero. So we've talked about this in channel. The discussion's been on for a while. Point is, Vic and I have drafted a FIP giving a specification of this. The FIP doesn't say anything that's not already in the discussion. It's just putting that into FIP format. And so I intend to publish that today. You're pending anything that comes out of this discussion. We can't actually implement this change before we expect the baseline function to cross over QAP, if we follow normal governance procedures. But we can complete governance before that happens, so that the network has certainty that this change will be implemented, and everyone can plan, predict their operational costs and plan accordingly. And then we actually activate it early next year, which will be after the crossing, but be sort of a known thing. So that's our current plan to mitigate this problem. There's an open FIP discussion. I'm going to publish the FIP today, and then we need a bit more time for circulation and understanding after this call, but we'd hope to complete governance in December. Let me stop there for questions, comments, anything.
Stephen, I think you have your hand up, and then Molly.
Okay. So yeah. Firstly, I want to say I have no objection about this proposal, and I think it's good to solve the problem right now. But I have some thoughts for our further study. One is that so we have assumption that we have this baseline which will double every year. But this does not really reflect the real world growth about the power. So there are some comments from the community to say that, so how about the baseline curve? So could we make the baseline curve more reasonable to reflect the real growth about the overall, for example, the world storage and the growth, or based on the current status of the blockchain, and to reflect the Filecoin storage growth the trend. This is one thing we need to, I think we need to think about this. It's because that we assume the baseline will double every year. That's why we think that the pledge will go to zero, right? So if the baseline is reasonable, we may not have this concern at all. This is one thing I think we need to further study. And the next thing is that baseline itself is very hard, is because you have to predict the growth rate, the trend, and this world is very complicated. So could we have a new mechanism to eliminate the baseline in this kind of block rewards calculation and pledge calculation? So I was thinking that perhaps we could try to find a new method or a new mechanism, not based on the prediction of the growth. Okay, that's my two cents here. Thank you.
Thanks. If I might respond just briefly, I think that the FIP discussion topic is a great place to have detail here. On the first proposal of sort of changing the parameters, the problem with just changing the parameter of the baseline function is that we'd be trying to tune it to match whatever reality is today, or close to reality, and it sets a precedent for us tweaking this number every time things change, and things will change due to macroeconomics and technological progress and so on. And so I don't think, my opinion is that setting an expectation that we're going to tweak this parameter regularly is not great either for us or for long-term predictability and so on. But to the second one of can we design a better system that doesn't have a baseline, I'm very enthusiastic to see ideas about that. I think we probably can. It's a big change, right? It's not a thing we can turn around in a couple of months because it would obviously affect lots of things. I'm personally very enthusiastic that there are better models which can decouple pledge from storage in some sense, still have all of the mechanism of encouraging growth, but not have the problems that it currently does. Like some of us have vague ideas about how to do this. I definitely want to see them. I think we can do a much better model. Molly?
Molly, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, agree with the ideas and also with the good pragmatic response of like, we can make additional improvements, but let's make those improvements separate from fixing the bug and giving clarity on the bug fix, in advance of it manifesting in the network. There was a question that came up in design, and I just want to make sure that we clarify it here, which is for the period between when this might manifest, it depends on network growth rate, obviously, so we don't know exactly when that would be, and when it would be fixed in a network upgrade for all of the storage providers who onboard data during that window and get slightly lower pledge than they would with the kind of corrected baseline function with the 30% minimum. What's the plan for those storage providers or those sectors that have slightly lower pledge than they should otherwise? Does that cause any issues? Do we need to do any mitigation for it?
Yeah.
Sorry, you go.
Yeah. So the good thing about this bug is that it's not something that happens immediately. So there will be a drop in pledge either way if this FIP is implemented before or after. It's just a question of the severity of that difference. And so I don't think there should really, Alex, we haven't actually discussed this, but I don't think there should be an explicit policy made to add back pledge that maybe would have been committed, because as I said before, taking advantage of this bug just means to onboard more. And so it is maybe a slight arbitrage opportunity for SPs at some point in time where they're like, oh, we know that maybe pledge will increase in the future, but we can also just onboard now at lower rates. But even that act of onboarding at lower rates then pushes us further away from the baseline. So it has the opposite effect of increasing the total amount of collateral locked on the network. So the short answer is, as long as we have a governance solution, this bug isn't something that is able to be really exploited over the course of the next year, over the immediate term. And it's less of an individual exploiting something wrong with the protocol and more just the entire, as a network, the protocol not having sufficient fill locked for consensus security purposes. And right now, the amount of fill locked is quite robust. So that doesn't change if we cross the baseline and don't have this immediately implemented. Does that answer your question, or is there something else you wanted there? And Alex, feel free to add anything if you have something too.
I think the clarification is, there's an arbitrage opportunity. It exists for the period of time, but it gets fixed, and there isn't any added complexity in trying to keep this simple. So there's no, clawback or requirement for storage providers to commit extra, because again, the aim is simplicity and not adding extra moving pieces or extra overhead for anyone interfacing with it. But there's also an incentive to make sure the fix lands, as soon as feasible without creating lots of additional, emergency upgrade overhead, such that the divergence between where the pledge gets to and what it should be from a corrected perspective doesn't diverge so much that it's a super large step function.
Yeah, and the last thing I'd say is sectors with pledges are already heterogeneous now. We don't have homogeneous sectors when it comes to the amount of pledge committed for a unit of power. And so we would this wouldn't be changing that, right? If we want homogeneous pledge for sectors, that's a separate thing entirely, but it's not wrong to have sectors that are committed at different pledge amounts at different times either.
AKA, it won't cause any problems in the protocol for there to be this discrepancy from a historical perspective once we fixed it.
Right, because what I'm saying is there really is no discrepancy per se, because there's no standard amount of pledge required for a sector. It's already dynamic.
Cool. Yeah, the practical difference, if we actually implement this within a few months of the crossing, the practical difference in pledge amounts is probably on the order of a few percent. Anyway, it grows over time, but early on, they both go down steeply. It's just slightly less steep.
Are there
Okay.
additional questions on this before we move on?
I think
No.
there's still the open thing on
Okay.
the question about governance. Molly raised an issue regarding like the whether this should be like a core dev centric process or if it should go through soft consensus. This was discussed in Iceland, but I don't think the entire body of core devs was here, and I think it's worth I think it's still worth doing the process for the FIP in the open, so people are definitely aware, and we've already started the discussion. But as a governing, not as a governing body, but as core devs, like we should decide how we arbitrate whether or not this is included or not in the protocol, insofar as we believe it should be.
I mean, there was one thing that was discussed. Oh, sorry, I don't mean to hopscotch you, Caitlin. I wasn't in the conversation in Iceland, but I was in a different conversation that happened at the FilDev Summit, talking about the different processes we've used for different types of security FIPS as a core devs group over time, where some of those security issues could be exploited if visible and published as a community. And that might have been either through hot fixes and releasing upgrades imminently that need to happen very quickly so that there isn't a window to exploit them, or quietly fixing a patch so that there isn't a window of time where the community's aware of an exploit factor. Again, in this context, that doesn't really exist. The ability to abuse this in the short term or even medium term is like very, very, very minimal, like kind of non-existent. At the same time, in the long term, this is a significant security issue for the network and for consensus security. And so from my vantage point, it is falls under kind of what Caitlin's been defining with like the additional definition and clarifications of FIP 1 around security FIPS that have security criticality in the network. And so I think it's great to have a public FIP. It's great to make sure the community is aware of both being able to model the trajectory of the network and understand the rationale behind it. And to the extent possible, would love to make sure that we're, all as a community understand why that's super critical, because that's a really valuable alignment point. On the flip side, it's security critical that we move forward with this, and I would encourage us to do so at the at an efficient rate, so that there isn't kind of this like lingering open question, especially once this is like an active bug that's being triggered in the wild. And maybe that involves moving faster on the additional updates that Caitlin has proposed to the FIP1 governance process, so that is more clearly documented in our FIP governance process, how exactly we handle security FIPS. We don't have that well documented in our FIP process right now, even though we have kind of like practice, but not documented process for how that happens. And again, we're doing, this is a slightly different case since it has low exploit factor. And so again, from my vantage point, it's a security FIP. In the case where Caitlin's additions get proposed, we'd be following a more public version of the security FIP process described there.
Thanks. Perhaps a good segue for Caitlin. Do you still want to add some thoughts to that?
I think I'll hold off and wait. I'm also quite sick, so I'm worried about rambling and not adding something concrete. But I think Molly summarized it well. And if there's anyone else who wants a summary of what was discussed in person in Iceland, we can do that also. But I think, again, Molly's aligned with what we discussed.
Great, thanks. All right, moving on quickly. Back to you, Alex.
Okay, these ones will be quick. This is mostly an FYI. So FIP74 is ready for last call. I've been holding off pushing it for last call while everyone's been focused on sort of the final releases for NV21. But I believe we're now in the sort of testing and consolidation phase there. So as a reminder, this is the long-term solution to the risk of the built-in market actors' use of cron exploding and causing the chain to slow down, which nearly happened I guess 6 months ago, and we patched it. That was a temporary fix. This is a permanent fix. FIP's complete, protocol implementation is complete. It's ready for last call. As a reminder, the only impact that this has on participants today is on the only impact besides making the chain better is that newly made storage deals where that have a non-zero on-chain payment and use the built-in market actor will need to, as providers of those methods will now need to invoke an explicit settlement method to claim their payment. So that's a very small fraction of deals today. The payment is currently not particularly cheap. It's about half the cost of a published storage deals, but it's going to get cheaper over time because the cost of all of the built-in market operations get more expensive the more that other people use the built-in market actor. And with FIP76, we expect the use of the built-in market actor to drop off. In particular, no one who's not doing any payments necessarily needs to use the built-in market. And so these costs, by the time that an SB comes around to claiming their cost at the end of a deal, I'd expect those costs to be down quite low if the use of the built-in storage market drops to some single-digit percentage point of its current cost. Anyway, this is all written up. The FIP's been out there for a while. There's a discussion post for it, which I failed to link here, but is linked from the FIP. So this is just an FYI that I'm going to suggest that this goes to last call, after this meeting today.
Same as this, I guess.
Yep, same deal here. FIP76 is direct data onboarding. So this enables cheaper, much higher scale of data onboarding, including with or without Fill Plus verified data cap. FIP's complete, implementation is complete. It's almost ready for last call. The only thing holding out here is that I am working right now on design and implementation for an API, so an exported method that can be called, invoked on or off chain, able to iterate over the claims in the verified registry actor, because when people use direct onboarding with Fill Plus but don't use the built-in market, the verified registry's claim functions very much like a deal. It has the same fields that you think of a deal having in terms of a term and the provider and the data being stored. And so the built-in market doesn't expose a function for iterating them, but it's the kind of thing that we should be exposing anyway. So I'm trying to work on a reasonable implementation of this, and we'll follow up. Not blocking it all, but intend to follow up sometime to start drafting a standard, like a FRC style standard for what. So for what deals mean in Filecoin. So when something has a deal and it uses what field names have what particular semantics in order to have some standard representation of different terms that deals can have. And then intention is that that's designed in order to be backwards compatible with the verified registry actor, so that the objects that are exposed over this API then function like deals for anything that's going to do a on-chain deal. I don't really know what to say. Deal work with multiple different markets that all have deals. I intend these to be backwards compatible with that. So that's coming next. But this API to export verified claims is sort of a precursor for it, because we're touching things there anyway. If I can't figure it out, we could defer this last bit until a future FIP. The implementation is annoyingly a little bit complex, or I'd have done it already. So if it ends up dragging out, we don't need to block on it. But since I was waiting before going to last call anyway, that is what I've been trying to do.
Question for you, Alex. When do you think this could be ready? Maybe an estimate.
Oh, like next week. If I'm not done by the end of this week, I'd say let's just go anyway and defer it to the implementation, defer it to the FRC that is going to talk about that standard.
Sounds good. Are there immediate questions based on the FYIs that we have? Concerns? Otherwise, you have a good chance to review those FIPS before they move to last call. Okay. Now, the fun part. Over to you, Caitlin.
The fun part. Thanks, Lucky. Yeah, so FIP1 v2 updates, wanted to use this time today to sort of provide a high-level overview of what has been presented, which should not be new at this point to anyone, and also to talk a little bit about next steps and how core devs will play into this, hopefully. However, immediately, the what that is highlighted here was supposed to just be a simple thing. This is a PR against FIP1 to update governance procedures and tooling. And even as of a few hours ago, this is out of date, since I think George and Alex both asked that instead of it being a replacement to FIP1, it just be submitted as a PR for an entirely new FIP file, which is what we're going to do. Nevertheless, the PR is open. Anyone can go and read it, and thanks in advance, since quite a few of you have already made some really thoughtful suggestions and really added some great substantive review thus far. Next slide, please. Great. So in terms of the actual content that has been presented, again, this is a slide. Oops, sorry, it should all come up at once. Great. Go back one. Sorry, Lucky. Thank you. This is a slide many of you should have seen before. We presented this in Paris, in Iceland, in Singapore, and Phil Vegas with the storage providers. We have talked about this for several months now in the community governance calls, all of which are public. There are three key components that change from our current procedures in FIP1 to what we would like to see in FIP1 v2. First, we have the 5 categories of FIP, which sort of colloquially assigns FIP categories according to sort of the level of complexity for the changes they may be presenting. This is not complexity in terms of their implementation necessarily, but in terms of the governance process and how community members are likely to interact with these FIPs and the level of scrutiny that we feel is necessary in order to decide that a change is appropriate for the network. Next, we're introducing an on-chain voting tool. This has been spec'd, and a beta release version of this tooling is available. There are links down on the bottom you can see, both to the current draft spec, which is fully public and always has been, as well as to the user interface and the code repo. We can talk about these things in just a second, but as part of the review process, we want everyone, including core devs, to be able to take a look at these things, to ask questions, to poke them, to test them, and to make sure that what we're building is robust and functional. And to go along with this, a community guild, which is really sort of a institutional body that is supposed to really decentralize the governance and review function that core devs have often been asked to take when it comes to handling more contentious FIPs. And what I'd really like to emphasize here is that these changes, both having a voting tool and also having this kind of guild presence, this representative body, these things are used primarily for crypto economic and community FIPs, which include governance changes. For most of our FIPs, technical core FIPs, anything from maintenance to changes to actors, changes to deal making, etc. We will still facilitate a process of soft consensus. We will still facilitate a process of review and audit. And for, I think, most of your work, I expect the processes to actually not change very much at all, except hopefully to have better documentation, since there should be more clarity around what's happening when. That being said, if you have questions about this, if you want to dive into it, the thing I'm going to ask you to do is to actually read the FIP text. It's a little long. It may take you about 30 minutes or so, maybe a little bit more. But we also have tons of recordings. We've spoken about this. We've taken a lot of community feedback, and we've had lots of public discussions about why these are being presented, why these structures, and how we hope for them to work. Of course, I'm always happy to answer more questions now, in the future. But what I'd really like to begin pushing folks to is those existing resources, and also documenting questions publicly and in writing, so that we can begin to incorporate very specific changes that you need to see, and also so that we have a record of questions and concerns folks may have, so that we can point other people to them as well. And as mentioned, a lot of you have done a really great job engaging with this, and I wanted to say thank you again for doing that. Next slide, please. So very locally, what is happening right now and what is going to happen next? So the FIP1 v2 PR was opened on October 15th as planned. Right now, what we're asking is for all the core devs to review these materials and provide input. And as is always the case, we don't know how long this is going to take. Part of the pause is that there's lots of administration that has to happen around this, lots of external review that's happening to make sure that we are meaningfully decentralized and that the things that we are proposing are appropriate for a network of this size. But also, I have to incorporate the changes myself. I've been sick for last week. Sorry if there's been some delay. But we don't know when we're going to get to the point where folks feel more or less satisfied or comfortable with the scoped changes. My personal goal is to get all of these things sort of accepted and ready for last call by the end of this month. I think that that is a very doable goal. And if we feel like there is a need to roll out these changes faster, we can try and do that. But there's going to be a couple of steps along the way to make sure that when we actually make the shift to a new governance system, that we know what we're doing and that we have a high degree of confidence, as high as possible, that the things that we're introducing are going to be functional. Okay, which brings us to this third section here. Over the next couple of weeks, FF will provide additional spec documentation and a rollout plan. This will include more clearly accessible and communicated links to all of the tooling that has already been built. Right now, we're waiting for all of the final contracting for this. It's like a very slow and boring process, frankly, a little frustrating, but that's how these things go. And once that's available, we will begin structuring tests and allowing folks to go in and actually create polls and connect their wallets and see what it looks like, because we have this sort of representational system that counts across many metrics based on on-chain data that's available to us. We want you to try and find problems, ask questions, tell us where the UI is unclear so that we can make those changes very quickly. And also to explain, what are we going to do with open PRs? What are we going to do with active ideas? What role do FIP editors have in sort of assigning new types of FIPs? All of these implementation details are being bundled up and will be shared as well. And we would not move this FIP1 draft, or whatever it ends up being titled, this FIP1 v2 draft, to last call until that is available and has had time to circulate for you all. As you can see, we'll get that final feedback incorporated, and then we will introduce this rollout period, which we presume will require lots of like little tweaks and adjustments as we begin to process FIPs using voting for the first time in particular. Okay. Sorry. Excuse me. Next slide, I think. Yeah. So final notes for core devs. Call to action is to please review. As always, again, many of you have, thank you. But please also note that FIP1 v2 will adhere to the same soft consensus process as all other FIPs. A bit of a catch-22, but also I think it will be fine. Governance things can always be a little clunky, and you always have to make lots of trade-offs in order to give people what they want. But we've been talking about this for a very long time. You all are probably sick of hearing about this. We want these changes to be made. And truly, my number one priority is really to make sure that we get a better, more responsive system. So whatever things front of mind or back of mind that you've been saving, please tell me now so that we can address them up front. And again, over the next few weeks, additional implementation details, including for core devs in particular, what this means for your review, this means for FIP editors, although across the board changes will be pretty minimal in terms of your day-to-day workflows. Making sure all outstanding questions and feedbacks are incorporated into the draft, that detailed rollout plan. And the last thing here is potentially proposing some changes to the core dev structure. Core devs play a role in governance. Sometimes they want to, sometimes I think as a group don't want to, that's fine. But we know for a long time, folks have wanted this group to be more open and also more concretely defined in terms of what it's supposed to be doing and who can be a part of it. And it's been difficult for us all to do that, I think, because of the role core devs have had to play in governance. And through these changes, what we're hoping to see is to formalize and separate out these functions a little bit more, with greater specificity, and actually move towards a group structure for this that allows those of you who just want to be doing technical reviews and having technical discussions to do that. Those of you who want to be on call for security FIPs and in the room to write those FIPs to do that. And for those of you who are really engaged in governance and do want to be reviewing FIPs, to do that as well, without that obligation being extended to everyone. I'm going to pause there, also mostly to cough. Sorry for the flu. But please, any questions? I'm happy to answer them.
I think we have Ayush.
Yeah, thank you for presenting this well, said Caitlin. So we talked about this a little bit in Singapore. Sorry, in Iceland, where I was able to attend. I confess I've not engaged with this process as much as with these changes as much as I should have. So kind of one question that'll help me get some context and potentially others. I'm wondering, as you said, these aren't the most comprehensive changes, but there's still enough changing that's fairly substantial. I'm wondering if there's a write-up, talk, or whatever the best resource would be that kind of describes motivation for a lot of this, like essentially what we felt hasn't been working with the FIPS process as currently exists, and how this set of transformations applied to that process we think will make it better. Because with a lot, I think that'll help me kind of like think about this a lot better.
Yeah, we do have that. We have lots of versions of this. Some are long, some are short. I'd be happy to share a bunch of them with you and with whomever else wants them. I think the TLDR on this, right, is that just having a soft consensus process works well in certain ecosystems. Ethereum is the best example. It also is a little bit more common in more traditional open source communities. The impetus for change here is that we are getting cultural signals that for Filecoin, the need for swifter and more decisive decision-making is a really necessary thing in order for governance to function in the way people expect it to, right? I have long railed against implementing any kind of voting, which is really a core piece of the changes we're introducing. I am still very skeptical, even of the spec that I wrote, which I think is a good thing, which is why I want all of you to review it. But I think that this will move us towards a more hybrid model of governance that frankly will just allow us to be more responsive to various situations. The reality is that I personally, my own bias is that I'm very comfortable with these long deliberative processes. I think they are good overall. But a lot of people don't work that way. And there are also times we've seen where very legitimately things need to move much quicker. And I think those were the big motivators. But again, we've talked about this and we have write-ups, and I'd be happy to share them with the group after this call.
Please do, yeah, whatever you think the best, whether it's a text or a video or talk, or recorded talk, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I thought you meant a SMS. No, okay. Anyone else?
Although if you want to send me, if you want to hit me up on SMS, I'm good with that too.
Yeah, I'm very glad that we're doing this, and it's clear that a lot of thought went into the changes being proposed. I just want to raise, I mean, this was raised in the discussion, but it's really hard to review this as a whole with some of the specs missing. So I'm glad that you have it on your timeline, that those will be shared over. Well, they have started to be shared, and the rest of them will be shared over the coming weeks. But I really do think that's essential for people to be able to review this in a meaningful way. I do have, in addition to that, a very quick question on this slide, which says additional implementation details will be pushed to the Filecoin spec. I think this might have been mentioned as well elsewhere, but not only is the spec really not very actively maintained, but I don't think it involves governance or includes governance information at all. So what is the plan here?
Two great notes. Cheers, I can point real quick. Yes, so we have long wanted a docs site, but without the ability to change FIP1, it's been uncertain where we can put these things. They work in GitHub, but that is not good. I have wanted a wiki or some kind of landing site for a long time. There was a ton of conversations about where this would live, and the answer was in Filecoin docs. Sorry, it shouldn't say the spec here. It will live in Filecoin docs. There's not currently a public governance section. There will be. And as to getting the implementation details, which many of them will go in that doc, it is a bit of a chicken or the egg, right? Big problem, because you don't want to approve FIP1 and say, oh, this looks good to me, I'm fine, I don't need to know any of the implementation details. That's fine. We also don't want to write all of those implementation details to great effect and people say, well, I have this fundamental problem with what you're proposing in FIP1, so all of these are irrelevant. So yes, I totally understand what you're saying. I personally do not expect in any way that anyone would feel comfortable signing off until you have those. A lot of it's written, it has to be reviewed, it's a long process. Once it's pushed, which I hope happens during lab week or maybe the next week after, we'll share them widely so folks can take a look, and also hopefully like walk you through what's what, so that it's not just like an overwhelming amount of text. The one thing I will flag that is a little administrative, all of this is coming from me. I will write all of this, which is fine. I do want to note, and this isn't, Lucky said I could share this, but he will be going on leave sometime in 2024. And so the goal is to have not only all of these implementation plans out in advance of the new year, but also with plenty of time for initial feedback and changes as well, because once 2024 rolls around, we will be even more capacity constrained to make these changes. So we'll just note that now. But George, I saw your comments. They are heard. And again, we will share everything when we have it for you so that you can take a look. Again, a little bit of brain fog right now. Does that answer everything you asked or address it?
It does. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Anyone else?
I think so. Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Scott, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Excellent. So I'm going to be relatively quick here. When we went to calibration, we found a bug. One of the bugs is basically we have a new function in the upcoming release that allows SPs to move their deadlines. One of the things that got overlooked in butterfly testing was what happens if a sector is expired. When you try to go move your deadlines, you end up with an error, and it actually prevents all of those deadlines from being moved. So the workaround, of course, is to compact and then kind of move, but we're gonna go ahead and fix it. So to include all of the rigor of every normal Lotus release that we do, we need to fully test all bug fix changes in calibration first. So we're going to do that along with Venus. Because of that, we're going to have to do another calibration upgrade, which was not part of the plan, but always possible. And then for that, I think we're going to change the mainnet date. I believe will be one more day out while we get the rest of the RCs ready and butterfly and calibration there. So there's probably going to be some more communication coming out in the next week about that. But you can see here mainnet date November 29th. You can rest assured that we do extensive testing and we find these things in calibration, that which is what it's for. We did this time. We're going to fix it. We're going through the full process. So that's a quick update on the watermelon upgrade. Is there anything else, Ayush or Steb or anybody who feels like there's anything else we need to call out there?
Yeah, thanks. Just one thing that I wanted to add. We discussed this as core devs internally, but just for anyone watching, as well as anyone that missed that conversation, the upgrade that we're performing on calibration is a somewhat unconventional one, but one that we think is well suited to the needs here. So we're not actually introducing a new network version on calibration. And so it's going to stay at network version 21 because it's already upgraded. It'll stay at actors version 12 and so on. But we are still performing basically a strictly code ID migration at that epoch on November 7th. We think this will work in this case because there's no difference to the shape of the state or anything else. So we're basically just transforming all of the minor code IDs from the wrong version to the right version at this upgrade. I think we got approvals from both Venus and Forrest in the thread discussing this, but if anyone foresees any issues with this, please flag that, because yeah, this is not really something that we've done before. I also just wanted to quickly say thank you to Tippy Fitz from the Lotus TSE team for finding this issue literally minutes after the calibration net upgraded, which saved us a lot of grief and prevented this from going to mainnet. And thanks to the entire Venus team, but Alan Zhu in particular, who was very helpful with reviewing the fix and so on.
Excellent. Well, okay, I think that's it from us on this one.
Great, thank you. Any final thoughts or questions? We have a few more minutes left. Okay. All right. Thank you all so much for joining us. We have our community governance calls monthly, if you haven't heard. And then remember to engage and share your thoughts and ideas. But I'll see you all next month. Goodbye, everyone.